For the longest time, I believed love was supposed to look a certain way. A boy meets a girl, they fall in love. White picket fence, 2 kids, happily ever after. That's the story I was told. That's the only version of love I saw in books, movies, and at family dinners. So when my heart beat faster for someone who didn't fit that mold, I thought something was wrong with me, that maybe I was broken, that maybe love, the way I felt it, wasn't real, or worse, wasn't worthy. But I was wrong. Growing up queer often means growing up unseen. You learn to read between the lines. You become fluent in silence. You notice how no one talks about that uncle's partner, how girls in movies only kiss boys, how when you try to express your feelings, people laugh it off or change the subject. You learn to shrink, to soften your voice, to change your walk, to nod and smile when people say, "You just haven't found the right guy yet." But deep inside, something in you aches, not for acceptance, but for the chance to love freely. Queer love is not broken. It is not a distortion of real love. It is not a phase. It is not confusion. It is not less than. Queer love is tender. It is powerful. It is sacred. It is built in stolen glances and whispered dreams, in bravery and vulnerability, in laughter that sounds like home. It's the way your heart jumps when she brushes your arm, the way he looks at you like the world finally makes sense, the way they say your name and it suddenly feels like poetry. Queer love isn't perfect, but no love is. We have fights, we have misunderstandings, we carry baggage from years of hiding, but we also carry resilience. We know what it means to fight for our truth. We know how to hold each other through storms, because queer love doesn't just exist, it resists. It blooms in spaces where it was never meant to. It carves joy into places meant for shame. It makes room for softness in a world that taught us to be hard. Do you remember the first time you said, "I love you," and meant it? The fear in your chest, but also the relief, like your heart was finally allowed to speak. Queer love teaches us courage, to be honest, to risk, to show up for each other even when we're scared. Therapy helped me unlearn the lie that queer love was something to be ashamed of. It taught me that I am not too much, that loving another human, fully, bravely, freely, is something to be proud of. I started rewriting my definition of love. Love is not gender. It is not conformity. It is not who makes the rules. Love is kindness, presence, laughter in the dark, a hand reaching for yours in the middle of chaos. Queer love is choosing each other again and again in a world that sometimes tells us not to. It's finding family in each other. It's dancing in your bedroom at 2 a.m. It's knowing you're safe in their arms, in their eyes, in their truth. Queer love may not look like the fairy tales we were fed, but it's more real than anything they could have written, because we write it ourselves. In every moment we choose to love loudly and live authentically. Queer love isn't broken. It never was. It's beautiful, it's powerful, it's ours, and it's worth celebrating. For most of my life, I walked on eggshells, always shrinking, always adjusting, always trying to make myself more acceptable. I apologized before I even spoke. I smiled when it hurt. I laughed at jokes that carved deep wounds in me just so I wouldn't make anyone uncomfortable. Being queer wasn't something I celebrated. It was something I managed, hid, and softened, like a sharp edge I kept sanding down. But one day, I couldn't anymore. It started small. A glance in the mirror where I didn't flinch. A refusal to laugh when a colleague made an offhand comment. A moment of silence when someone asked if I had a partner and I said, "Yes, she's a woman," without blinking. These small moments stacked, quietly at first, then louder. I started noticing the burden I was carrying wasn't just from the outside world, it was from me. from the little voice inside that said, "Don't make it hard for them. Don't stand out too much. Don't make a scene." That voice had been with me since childhood. It echoed through church sermons, family dinners, and playground whispers. It followed me into every relationship, every job interview, every introduction, and I had listened for far too long. The turning point wasn't dramatic. It didn't come with fireworks or a viral coming out post. It came during therapy, on a Tuesday. I was talking about a time I felt ashamed of holding my girlfriend's hand in public. My therapist asked one question: "Do you believe your love is something to be ashamed of?" I paused. I cried. I didn't answer. But later that night, I did. I stood in front of the mirror, the same one I used to avoid, and whispered, "No, I don't." That was the beginning. I stopped apologizing in ways that were invisible. I stopped over-explaining my pronouns. I stopped accepting invitations from people who made me feel small. I stopped using humor to soften my truth. I stopped allowing others to speak about my identity like it was a debate. And slowly, I became louder in the ways that mattered. I said, "I love her," without a flinch. I told my mother I wasn't confused. I was brave. I wore the clothes that felt like home. I built friendships that felt like safety, not survival. I stopped apologizing for being too sensitive, too emotional, too much. I realized I was never too much. I was just too real for those still pretending. Today, I'm not sorry anymore. I don't dilute myself for comfort. I take up space. I love openly. I exist honestly. And if you're watching this, maybe you've been apologizing too. Let this be your reminder. You don't owe the world an apology for being who you are. You never did. Growing up, I never understood why I felt so different. While other kids played without a second thought, I was constantly calculating how to walk, how to talk, how to blend in. I didn't have the language for what I was feeling, but I knew I was not like the others. And that difference, I learned quickly, was something to hide. My childhood was marked by little moments that taught me shame. The time I chose a girly toy and the adults laughed uncomfortably. The way my voice was mocked in school. The sermons I heard at church, painting people like me as wrong, sinful, unworthy. These weren't just incidents, they were silent lessons that seeped into my bones. By the time I hit puberty, I had become a master of disguise, camouflaging my true self behind what was acceptable. But shame doesn't stay quiet forever. It shows up in anxiety, in broken relationships, in the voice that says, "You're too much," or "You'll never be enough." It followed me into adulthood like a shadow, and for a while I thought that's just how life was. Therapy changed that. For the first time, I had someone say, "That wasn't your fault." I was encouraged to grieve what I lost, the childhood I deserved but didn't have. I began unpacking the narratives I'd carried, and slowly I replaced them with truths of my own. That I am worthy. That my queerness is not a flaw but a form of beauty. That softness, vulnerability, and difference are strengths. Healing didn't come all at once. It came in layers. Crying in therapy, journaling the memories I'd buried, talking to friends who mirrored my journey. I had to reprint myself, offering comfort and compassion where there had once been only fear. I learned to find joy in queer spaces, places where people wore their truth out loud. I learned to speak up when I felt small. I started to dance again, sing out loud, wear what made me feel like me. Each act was a reclaiming. Today, I still carry remnants of that childhood shame, but they don't control me anymore. They are reminders of how far I've come. I no longer hide. I live out loud, not because I need validation, but because I finally believe in my own worth. If you're holding on to shame, know this. It wasn't your fault, and healing is possible. Your story, like mine, can be rewritten, not with perfection, but with courage. You are not broken. You are becoming. There was a time when I thought silence was safety. Growing up queer in a home where love came with conditions, I learned early on how to hide parts of myself. I knew which questions not to ask, which clothes not to wear, and which parts of my voice to soften. I was praised for being quiet, for being agreeable, but no one knew the cost. I carried that silence like a shield into adulthood, even as I found words to describe my identity, queer, non-binary, sensitive. I still whispered them like secrets. I dated in the dark, loved quietly, and shrank in spaces where others expanded. My trauma had become my compass, always pointing me back to shame. But healing doesn't begin with answers. It begins with questions. My turning point came in a therapist's office, where for the first time someone looked at me and said, "You're not broken." I didn't believe them at first, but something cracked open. It was the first time I realized I had never let anyone love all of me, including the messy, confused, or angry parts. I began the slow work of reintroducing myself to myself. I started journaling about the parts of me I had exiled. I wrote letters I never sent to the people who had hurt me. I practiced saying, "I deserve to take up space," out loud, even if my voice trembled. I started noticing what joy felt like, not just fleeting happiness, but the grounded kind that comes from being real. I came out to more people. I cried in public. I wore colors I had once deemed too loud. I looked in the mirror and held eye contact. It all mattered. There were setbacks, moments I questioned everything again, days I wished I could fold myself small, but each time I returned to the truth. My story matters. Not despite the trauma, but because of how I've survived it. Empowerment, for me, wasn't a sudden transformation. It was a daily choice to choose myself, to stop editing my voice, to let people in, to love out loud. Today, I tell my story not for sympathy, but for connection, for the queer kid who's still hiding, for the adult who thinks it's too late, for anyone who needs to hear that survival isn't the end, thriving is. This is my queer story, from trauma to empowerment, and it's still being written. For years, I carried an invisible weight, the kind of heaviness that doesn't show up on x-rays, but lives in your chest, your thoughts, and the way you move through the world. I had no language for it. No one had ever told me it was okay to feel this lost. And being queer added another layer, a layer of silence, of fear, of not belonging anywhere. Therapy changed that. It didn't happen overnight. The first few sessions were awkward. I didn't know how to start, what to say, or even what I was supposed to feel. But my therapist was patient. She held space for the parts of me I had learned to hide, the sadness, the anger, the confusion. One day, I told her about the first time I realized I was different. I was 10, maybe 11, and I had a crush on a boy in my class. I didn't even know what a crush was back then, but I knew I felt something soft and electric when he laughed. I told my mum once, without thinking, and she froze. Then she said, "Don't say things like that." I never did again. That moment became the first stone in the wall I built around myself. Therapy helped me take that wall down, brick by brick. I learned that shame isn't something we're born with. It's something we're taught. Every time someone told me to act normal, to stop being so sensitive, or to man up, they were handing me a little piece of shame, and I was too young to refuse it. Through therapy, I met that shame with compassion. I learned to hold my younger self with kindness instead of judgment. I saw how my survival tactics, people-pleasing, perfectionism, disappearing in a room, were not flaws but defenses. My therapist helped me rewrite my inner narrative. Instead of, "I'm too much," I began saying, "I am enough." We talked about relationships too, how I kept choosing people who couldn't love me fully, how I feared being seen, how I confused attention with affection. I cried a lot in those sessions, and every tear made room for something new. Therapy didn't give me all the answers, but it gave me tools. I learned how to set boundaries, how to listen to my body, how to name my needs without apologizing. Most importantly, I learned that I didn't have to heal alone. Today, I'm still queer, still soft, still figuring things out. But I'm not ashamed anymore. I walk with my head higher. I trust my voice. I know that my identity is not a burden. It's a beautiful, complex, powerful truth. And I owe that to the brave step I took into a therapist's office years ago. If you're on the edge wondering if therapy is for you, this is your sign. You deserve to be heard. You deserve to heal. You deserve to come home to yourself. I used to believe that love, especially self-love, was something reserved for other people. People who fit in, people who weren't different. Growing up, I felt like I had to wear a mask every single day, smiling when I wanted to cry, laughing at jokes that cut too deep. Coming out wasn't a moment, it was a journey. I didn't burst out of a closet. I slowly unlocked the door from the inside, scared of what was waiting on the other side. When I finally said the words out loud, "I'm queer," my voice shook. But the world didn't end. It just changed. At first, it was quiet. Some friends disappeared. Some family members went silent. I felt lonely, like I had traded safety for truth. But then, something amazing happened. I started finding me. I wore what I wanted, even if it scared me. I spoke my truth, even if it trembled. I looked in the mirror, not searching for flaws, but for someone I could learn to love. Therapy helped, community helped. But what healed me the most was giving myself permission to exist fully, not as someone who needed to be fixed, but as someone who was finally free. And slowly, I realized, loving myself wasn't a reward, it was a right. I didn't have to earn it. I just had to believe I deserved it. If you're listening to this and you're in that scary in-between, please know there's nothing wrong with you. You don't have to apologize for taking up space. You are not too much. You are enough, exactly as you are. For years, I said sorry more than I said thank you. Sorry for being too loud. Sorry for being too quiet. Sorry for dressing weird. Sorry for loving differently. Sorry for existing in ways that didn't make others comfortable. I bent myself in 1,000 shapes just to fit into boxes I never belonged in. I laughed at jokes that hurt me. I nodded along when people made assumptions about my life. I bit my tongue when I wanted to scream, "This is me!" But one morning, I woke up, exhausted. I looked at myself in the mirror and didn't see someone broken. I saw someone tired of apologizing. So that day, I made a quiet promise. No more apologies for who I am. I wore the outfit I loved, even if people stared. I corrected someone when they misgendered me, even if my voice shook. I told a friend, "I'm queer," not whispering, but owning it. And you know what happened? Nothing exploded. But everything changed. People didn't leave because I was honest. They left because they were never meant to stay. I stopped watering down my laughter. I stopped shrinking in spaces I belonged to. I stopped asking, "Am I too much?" Because I am not too much. I am enough, brave enough, bold enough, real enough. That day wasn't loud. It didn't come with parades or applause. It came with peace. And now I live every day trying to keep that promise. No more apologies, just truth, just me. I used to hide parts of myself like they were something to be ashamed of. As a child, I learned that love had conditions, spoken and unspoken. Don't talk like that. Sit like a boy. Why are you acting so sensitive? I internalized those words until they became my inner voice. I told myself I wasn't enough, that I had to change, shrink, erase pieces of who I was, just to be loved. I became an expert at masking. I laughed when I wanted to cry. I acted normal even when it hurt. I was praised for being well-behaved, not for being real. But shame has a way of seeping into everything. And as I grew older, it didn't disappear. It just wore new clothes. Perfectionism, people-pleasing, silence. It wasn't until I started therapy that I realized that shame didn't belong to me. It was inherited, planted, taught. I was never broken. I was told I was. And there's a big difference. Healing didn't happen overnight. It came in small, brave steps. It was the first time I cried in front of someone and didn't apologize. It was writing letters to my younger self saying, "You did nothing wrong." It was unlearning the belief that I had to earn love. Now I speak softer to myself. I hold space for the kid I used to be. I remind them, "You were always enough." As a queer adult, I've realized healing isn't about forgetting the pain. It's about loving the parts of me that once felt unlovable. And slowly, that shame loses its power. I used to believe that my queerness was a burden, not because it ever felt wrong, but because the world told me it was. Growing up, I learned how to shrink myself. I tiptoed around my truth. I smiled when I wanted to scream. I stayed silent when I wanted to speak. The trauma didn't always come in loud crashes. Sometimes it was a quiet rejection, a lingering stare, a question that wasn't really a question, but a warning. Each moment left a mark, not on my skin, but on my spirit. I buried pieces of myself just to survive, and I told myself, if you don't speak it, maybe it will go away. But it didn't. Pain, left unspoken, grows roots. It shows up as anxiety, as shame, as nights spent wondering if I was truly lovable. Then one day, I cracked open, not in a way that broke me, but in a way that let the light in. I found community. I found stories that sounded like mine. And slowly, I found the courage to speak, to say, "This happened to me," to say, "I deserve more than survival." Empowerment didn't look like shouting from rooftops. It looked like whispering, "I love you" to myself in the mirror. It looked like setting boundaries, like walking into rooms and taking up space without apology. I am no longer who I was before the trauma, but I am not broken. I am rebuilt, wiser, softer, stronger. And now, when I tell my story, I don't speak from pain. I speak from power. This is not just a queer story. It's a healing one, a rising one. A story that says, you are not alone. I used to think therapy was for other people, people with real problems. I didn't realize that growing up queer in a world that questions your existence is a real problem. For years, I carried silent wounds, from the way teachers avoided saying the word gay, from friends who joked about queerness like it was something to mock, from the silence at family dinners when anything remotely different came up. These weren't loud traumas, but they were cuts, paper thin, maybe, but dozens of them, and they built a wall around me. When I finally stepped into therapy, I wasn't expecting a miracle. I just wanted a place to breathe, to say things I was too scared to say out loud, like, I don't think my parents would love the real me, or I'm tired of pretending I'm okay. At first, I cried more than I spoke. Then I spoke more than I cried. And eventually, I laughed. I learned that queerness isn't something to fix. It's something to honor. Therapy gave me language for my experiences. It helped me unlearn shame, to set boundaries, to stop apologizing for my existence. I realized I wasn't broken. I was hurt. And healing is not weakness, it's power. Now I walk through the world differently, more whole, more open, more me. So if you've ever felt too much or not enough, if you've been hiding parts of yourself just to survive, know this, there's nothing wrong with you. You're not too queer, too sensitive, too anything. Therapy didn't erase the